The bitter December wind cut through Riverside Heights like a blade, carrying with it the scent of snow and broken dreams. Johnny Red never imagined that a routine Christmas Eve grocery run would lead him to discover something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about poverty, family, and the true meaning of giving. As he walked past the dimly lit alley behind Morgantown's downtown shopping district, he spotted a small figure hunched over the dumpster behind Romano's Italian Bistro. What he found that little girl searching for in the garbage would not only shock him to his core, but set in motion a chain of events that would transform two broken families and an entire community's understanding of what it means to help those who need it most. Before we dive into this incredible journey, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you believe in the magic of unexpected Christmas miracles, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have something truly extraordinary planned that will restore your faith in humanity. Johnny Red had never planned to spend Christmas Eve alone with his 8-year-old daughter Lily, trudging through the slushy streets of Riverside Heights with a grocery list that reflected their tight budget more than any holiday celebration. The divorce papers had been finalized just 3 months ago, and Rebecca had taken their older son, Kyle, to spend the holidays with her new boyfriend in California, leaving Johnny with shared custody, a studio apartment above Chen's laundromat, and the weight of trying to make Christmas magical on a construction worker's salary. The fluorescent lights of Morgantown's only late-night grocery store buzzed overhead as Johnny counted and recounted the crumpled bills in his wallet. $43.16. Enough for sandwich meat, bread, a small carton of milk, and maybe, if he was lucky, a candy cane for Lily's stocking. The elaborate Christmas morning he dreamed of giving his daughter seemed as distant as the warm suburban home they'd lost in the divorce settlement. "Daddy, can we get the cookies with the frosting?" Lily asked, her breath fogging in the cold air as they walked toward the store entrance. Her worn pink coat, a hand-me-down from her older cousin, hung loose around her small frame, and Johnny's heart clenched at the hope in her voice. "We'll see, sweetheart," he replied, the same response he'd been giving to most of her requests lately. Not a no, but not the yes she deserved either. The shopping trip was mercifully quick. Johnny navigated the aisles with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to stretch every dollar, while Lily pressed her nose against the bakery glass, staring at the elaborately decorated Christmas cakes they couldn't afford. He bought generic everything, avoiding eye contact with the cashier who looked at their modest purchases with what felt like pity. It was 9:47 p.m. when they emerged from the store, Lily clutching the single candy cane Johnny had splurged on despite their budget. The streets of Riverside Heights were nearly empty, most families already tucked away in warm homes, wrapping last-minute presents and preparing for Christmas morning. Johnny felt the familiar ache of inadequacy as they passed houses decorated with elaborate light displays, their windows glowing with the warmth of what looked like perfect family gatherings. "Daddy, look!" Lily whispered, tugging on Johnny's coat sleeve as they turned down Merchant Street toward their apartment. The narrow alley that ran behind the row of upscale restaurants and boutiques that had recently revitalized downtown Morgantown was dim. The businesses were closed for the holiday, their dumpsters lined up like metal sentinels against the brick walls. But there, barely visible in the dim glow of a security light, was a small figure. A child, no older than Lily, was methodically searching through the garbage behind Romano's Italian Bistro. She wore a thin jacket that offered little protection against the December cold, and her dark hair hung in tangled strands around her face. What struck Johnny most wasn't the fact that she was digging through trash. He'd seen enough hardship in Riverside Heights to know that poverty forced people into desperate situations. What shocked him was the careful, systematic way she was conducting her search, as if she were looking for something specific. "Should we help her, Daddy?" Lily asked, her breath small but determined. Even at 8 years old, she recognized that something was terribly wrong with the scene before them. Johnny's first instinct was to keep walking. He had his own problems, his own daughter to worry about, and getting involved in strangers' business had never ended well for him before. But something about the little girl's methodical movements, the way she handled each piece of discarded food with a combination of hope and resignation, made him pause. As they watched from the mouth of the alley, the girl pulled something from the dumpster that made Johnny's blood run cold. It wasn't food scraps or aluminum cans she was collecting. In her small hands, she held what appeared to be textbooks, damaged by food waste and moisture, but still recognizable as educational materials. She was followed by carefully extracting notebooks, some with pages missing, others stained, but still partially usable. "She's looking for school supplies," Johnny whispered, more to himself than to Lily. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. As the girl continued her search, Johnny realized she wasn't alone. An older woman, perhaps in her 60s, emerged from the shadows deeper in the alley. She moved with the careful steps of someone trying to preserve dignity while navigating an impossible situation. She wore a coat that had once been expensive but now showed signs of wear, and when she spoke to the little girl, her voice carried the unmistakable accent of education and refinement. "Did you find anything useful, Aurora?" the woman asked softly, her breath visible in the cold air. "Some books, Grandmother Elena," the girl replied, holding up her salvaged treasures. "The math workbook only has water damage on the first few pages." Johnny's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't just a case of homelessness or hunger, though those were clearly present. This was something far more complex and heartbreaking. A grandmother and granddaughter, both clearly from educated backgrounds, were spending Christmas Eve searching through garbage for educational materials. The careful way they sorted through the discarded items, the dignity they maintained even in their desperate circumstances, and the priority they placed on books over food told the story that challenged everything Johnny thought he knew about poverty and need. What he discovered next would change not just Christmas Eve, but the entire trajectory of multiple lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Johnny Red's alarm clock buzzed at 5:15 a.m. every weekday morning, the same cracked plastic device that had survived 3 apartment moves and countless overtime shifts. The sound echoed through their cramped studio apartment above Chen's laundromat, where the constant hum of washing machines below had become the soundtrack to their new life. He'd roll out of the fold-out couch that served as his bed, careful not to wake Lily, who slept peacefully in the apartment's only real bedroom, surrounded by the few toys they'd managed to keep after the divorce. The morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency born from necessity. Johnny would start the coffee maker, a wedding gift from 7 years ago that Rebecca had let him keep, probably out of pity, while laying out Lily's school clothes on the small kitchen table that doubled as her homework desk. The radiator clanked and hissed, providing just enough heat to take the edge off the December cold, but never quite enough to make the apartment feel truly warm. By 6 a.m., Johnny would be reviewing his work schedule on his phone, checking for any last-minute changes or overtime opportunities. His job at Riverside Construction paid well enough when there was work, but winter meant fewer projects and shorter days. The company specialized in commercial renovations, and Johnny had worked his way up to crew supervisor over the past 5 years through reliability more than ambition. He showed up on time, did quality work, and never complained about the difficult jobs that others avoided. The math was always tight. Rent for the studio apartment was $850 a month, nearly half his income when work was steady. Child support payments to Rebecca were another $400, even though she made more as a dental hygienist than he did in construction. Then came utilities, groceries, Lily's school supplies, and the constant worry about unexpected expenses like car repairs or medical bills.
His old Ford pickup truck had 190,000 miles and made concerning noises that he couldn't afford to have diagnosed, let alone fixed. "Daddy, my shoes are getting too small again," Lily had mentioned the week before, wiggling her toes in sneakers that were clearly pinching her feet. Johnny had nodded and made a mental note to check the clearance section at the discount store downtown, hoping to find something that would last through the school year. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, but the financial devastation was still unfolding. Rebecca had kept the house they'd bought together in Morgantown's Maple Grove subdivision, along with most of the furniture and household items. Johnny had moved out with his clothes, his tools, and whatever personal items fit in the back of his truck. The studio apartment was supposed to be temporary, just until he could save enough for a proper 2-bedroom place, but the security deposits and moving costs made that goal feel increasingly distant. Lily handled the transition with the resilience that children somehow possess, but Johnny caught glimpses of confusion and sadness that broke his heart. She'd ask why we couldn't have Christmas at our old house, why Kyle got to go to California while she stayed in Riverside Heights, why Daddy's new apartment didn't have room for her art supplies. Johnny answered with carefully crafted explanations that protected her from the full weight of adult failures, while trying to maintain some sense of stability and hope. The custody arrangement gave Johnny every other weekend and alternating holidays, which meant this Christmas Eve was his responsibility. Rebecca had made it clear through their lawyers that she expected him to provide appropriate Christmas experiences for Lily, despite the obvious financial constraints. The pressure to create magical Christmas memories on a budget that barely covered necessities felt crushing.
Work had been particularly scarce in December. The construction industry slowed down during winter months, and this year's mild fall had given way to an unusually harsh early winter that shut down most outdoor projects weeks ahead of schedule. Johnny had managed to pick up some interior renovation work, but the hours were inconsistent, and the pay reflected the seasonal desperation of workers competing for limited opportunities. His savings account, once a source of modest pride, had been depleted by divorce attorney fees and the costs of establishing his new living situation. The emergency fund he'd carefully built over years of overtime was gone, spent on deposits and down payments for apartment rental, utility connections, and basic furnishings from second-hand stores. Now he lived paycheck to paycheck, carefully calculating every purchase and constantly worried about unexpected expenses that could push them into real financial crisis. The laundromat below their apartment was owned by Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had immigrated from Taiwan 30 years ago and built a small business empire of coin-operated services throughout Riverside Heights. She'd taken pity on Johnny's situation and offered him the studio apartment at below-market rent in exchange for basic maintenance work around the building. It wasn't charity. Johnny earned every discount through weekend repairs and late-night emergency calls, but it was the kind of arrangement that made their current life possible. Lily attended Riverside Elementary, a public school that served the working-class neighborhood with dedication but limited resources. Her teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had pulled Johnny aside during the last parent conference to mention that Lily was exceptionally bright but seemed distracted lately. The implication was clear. The family disruption was affecting her academic performance, adding another layer of guilt to Johnny's already heavy burden of parental responsibility. Despite the financial stress, Johnny was determined to maintain some Christmas traditions. He'd managed to save enough to buy Lily a small gift, a beginner's art set from the discount store that cost $12.99 and would give her something to unwrap on Christmas morning. It wasn't the elaborate celebration they'd enjoyed in previous years, but it represented hope and continuity in the midst of upheaval. The evening routine was Johnny's favorite part of each day. After dinner, usually something simple like grilled cheese sandwiches or pasta with jarred sauce, they would sit together at the kitchen table while Lily did homework and Johnny reviewed bills or job applications.
She would chatter about her day at school, her friends, her dreams of becoming an artist or a veterinarian, or sometimes both. In those moments, surrounded by the warm yellow light of their single overhead fixture, Johnny could almost forget about the financial pressure and focus on what really mattered: his daughter's laughter, her curiosity about the world, and their unshakable bond as a family of two. This was the reality Johnny Red navigated every day: the constant balancing act of financial survival, emotional stability, and parental responsibility. Each decision was calculated against their limited resources, each small victory measured against the larger goal of providing Lily with security and hope. It was a life that required daily courage, the kind that never made headlines but sustained millions of families facing similar challenges across America. The Christmas Eve shopping trip that would change everything was just another example of Johnny trying to stretch limited resources into something that felt like abundance, another attempt to create magic from determination and love when money simply wasn't available to solve their problems. Johnny's decision to approach the alley wasn't born from heroism or grand gestures. It came from the simple recognition that a child was in distress on Christmas Eve, and his own father had taught him that walking away from suffering was never the right choice. Taking Lily's hand firmly in his, he stepped into the narrow passageway between buildings, their footsteps echoing softly against the brick walls. "Excuse me," Johnny called out gently, not wanting to startle the grandmother and granddaughter who were still methodically sorting through discarded items. "Are you both okay?" The older woman, Elena, straightened immediately, her posture shifting into a defensive stance that spoke of practiced dignity under pressure. Up close, Johnny could see that her coat, while worn, was well-tailored and expensive. Her silver hair was neatly arranged despite their circumstances, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone accustomed to authority and respect. "We are fine, thank you," Helena replied, her voice carrying a slight accent that Johnny couldn't quite place. European, perhaps, with the careful enunciation of someone who had learned English as a second language, but mastered it completely. Aurora, the little girl, clutched her salvaged textbooks against her chest protectively. She was perhaps 9 or 10 years old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed far too serious for her age. Her clothes, like her grandmother's, showed signs of quality beneath the wear: a wool sweater that had been carefully mended, shoes that were once expensive, but now showed the effects of extended use without replacement.
"I'm Johnny," he said, crouching down to Aurora's eye level. "This is my daughter Lily. We live just a few blocks from here." He gestured toward Lily, who stepped forward with the innocent boldness that children possess when they recognize another child in need. "I'm Aurora," the girl replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my grandmother, Elena Vasquez. We're looking for school books because mine got ruined when our apartment flooded last month." The simple statement hit Johnny like a physical blow. Here was a child who had lost her educational materials, the tools she needed to learn and grow, and instead of receiving help from social services or community organizations, she was spending Christmas Eve digging through restaurant garbage with her grandmother, hoping to find discarded textbooks that might still be usable. Elena placed a protective hand on Aurora's shoulder, and Johnny could see the mixture of pride and shame that warred across her features. "Aurora is exceptionally bright," she said, the grandmother's love evident in every word. "She has been accepted into the accelerated program at Riverside Academy. But the school supplies," she trailed off, unwilling to voice the full extent of their financial desperation. Riverside Academy was Morgantown's most prestigious private school, known for its rigorous academic standards and full scholarship program for gifted students from low-income families. Johnny had driven past its imposing brick buildings countless times, never imagining that his life would intersect with families from that world.
The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a child brilliant enough to earn admission to the area's finest educational institution, reduced to scavenging for basic learning materials. "What happened to your apartment?" Lily asked, with the directness that children employ when adults dance around difficult topics. Her question was innocent, but pierced straight to the heart of their situation. Aurora looked up at her grandmother, who nodded almost imperceptibly before the child continued. "The building where we lived had old pipes, and when it got really cold 2 weeks ago, they burst and flooded our unit. The landlord said it wasn't his fault and that we had to pay for a new place ourselves, but we didn't have money for deposits or anything like that." Johnny's construction background immediately filled in the details that Aurora couldn't articulate. He'd seen similar situations countless times: neglectful landlords who allowed properties to deteriorate until emergency repairs became tenants' problems, families displaced without recourse because they lacked the resources to fight unfair evictions or demand proper maintenance. The legal system that was supposed to protect renters often failed those who couldn't afford extended court battles or temporary housing while disputes were resolved. "So you've been staying," Johnny began, then stopped, realizing he didn't want to force them to admit to homelessness in front of the children. "We've been managing," Elena said diplomatically, but the careful way she avoided specifics told Johnny everything he needed to know. They were sleeping rough, possibly in shelters when space was available, more likely in their car or other temporary arrangements that offered minimal protection from the December cold. The textbooks Aurora had retrieved from the dumpster were water-damaged and stained, but still partially readable. Johnny recognized a fourth-grade mathematics workbook, a science textbook covering basic chemistry and physics, and what appeared to be an advanced reading comprehension guide that would challenge students well above Aurora's age level. The girl's academic capabilities were clearly exceptional if she was working with materials designed for older students. "Aurora reads at a high school level," Elena explained, noticing Johnny's examination of the books. "She taught herself algebra using library books when she was 8 years old. The scholarship to Riverside Academy covers tuition, but families are expected to provide their own supplies and materials." The bitter irony of the situation crystallized for Johnny. Here was a child whose intellectual gifts could potentially change her entire life trajectory, but bureaucratic gaps and systemic failures were threatening to derail her education over something as basic as textbooks and school supplies. The very materials that other families took for granted, purchased casually during back-to-school shopping trips, had become insurmountable obstacles for Aurora and Elena. "The school starts winter session on January 3rd, Aurora added quietly. "I need to have all my materials ready by then, or they might give my spot to another student." Johnny felt his chest tighten with recognition of the impossible pressure this child was carrying. At 9 years old, she understood that her entire future might depend on finding usable educational materials in restaurant garbage. The weight of adult responsibilities had been placed on shoulders far too young to bear them, yet Aurora approached the challenge with a maturity and determination that spoke to both her character and the guidance of her grandmother. "What subjects are you supposed to be studying?" Lily asked, with her curiosity overcoming any social awkwardness about their unusual meeting place. "Advanced mathematics, scientific inquiry, classical literature, and Spanish, plus art and music appreciation, but those don't require as many books." Johnny made rapid mental calculations. The textbooks required for such a demanding curriculum would cost hundreds of dollars new, and even used versions would strain most family budgets. For Aurora and Elena, facing homelessness and surviving day-to-day on whatever resources they could gather, such purchases were simply impossible. Elena pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her coat pocket, a supply list from Riverside Academy that detailed everything Aurora would need for the winter semester. The list was extensive: specific textbook editions, scientific calculators, art supplies, writing materials, and various other educational tools that represented both opportunity and insurmountable expense. We've been checking every bookstore, every library sale, every place that might have used educational materials, Elena explained. But Aurora's grade level and advanced placement means she needs very specific resources that aren't commonly discarded or donated.
The December wind picked up, cutting through the alley with renewed force. Johnny watched as Aurora instinctively moved closer to her grandmother for warmth, both of them shivering despite their attempts to maintain dignity and composure. His own daughter pressed against his side, and he realized that Lily was witnessing poverty and educational inequality in a way that would likely stay with her forever. "Look," Johnny said, making a decision that surprised even himself. "It's Christmas Eve, and it's freezing out here. Why don't you both come back to our apartment? It's not much, but it's warm, and we can figure out how to help with Aurora's school situation." Elena's eyes flashed with something between gratitude and suspicion. "We don't accept charity," she said firmly. "We've always made our own way." "It's not charity," Johnny replied, understanding her need to maintain independence and dignity. "It's neighbors helping neighbors. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "Aurora might be able to help Lily with her math homework. Sounds like a fair trade to me." The offer hung in the cold air between them, representing a choice point that would determine whether this chance encounter dissolved back into the Christmas Eve darkness or evolved into something that might change multiple lives. Johnny waited, recognizing that Elena needed to make the decision for both herself and Aurora, respecting the authority and wisdom that had somehow kept them together and surviving despite impossible circumstances. Aurora looked up at her grandmother with hope shining in her young eyes, and Johnny realized that whatever Elena decided in the next few moments would set in motion events that none of them could yet imagine. Elena's silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as she weighed Johnny's offer against years of hard-earned independence. Her eyes moved from Aurora's hopeful face to Lily's genuine smile, then settled on Johnny's patient expression. Finally, she nodded with the dignity of someone accepting assistance rather than charity. "Thank you," she said simply. "We would appreciate that very much." The walk to Johnny's apartment was awkward at first, with Aurora and Elena trying to maintain their composure while carrying their salvaged books and personal belongings. Johnny noticed that Elena moved with the careful steps of someone whose back ached from sleeping in uncomfortable places, while Aurora clutched her damaged textbooks like precious treasures. Lily, with the social ease of childhood, quickly began chattering about their apartment, the laundromat downstairs, and Mrs. Chen's cat that sometimes wandered the hallways. "It's not very big," Johnny warned as they climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, the smell of industrial detergent and fabric softener growing stronger with each step. "But it's warm and dry." When he opened the door to their studio apartment, Johnny saw his living space through Elena and Aurora's eyes and felt a flush of embarrassment. The fold-out couch that served as his bed was still rumbled from that morning. Yesterday's dishes sat in the small sink, and Lily's homework papers were scattered across the kitchen table. The single room that contained their entire life suddenly felt cramped and inadequate. But Aurora's reaction was immediate and positive. "Oh, you have so many books," she exclaimed, moving toward the small bookshelf that Johnny had built from scrap lumber. The shelves held a mixture of his old textbooks from community college, Lily's children's books, and paperback novels he'd collected over the years. Elena took in the apartment's details with the observant eye of someone who understood the economics of small spaces. She noticed the carefully arranged furniture that maximized functionality, the heating system that actually worked, and the general cleanliness that spoke to Johnny's efforts to create a good home for his daughter despite financial limitations. "Please sit down," Johnny said, gesturing toward the small couch, while he cleared homework papers from the kitchen table. "Can I make some coffee or hot chocolate? I think I have some packets somewhere." "Coffee would be wonderful,"
Elena replied, settling onto the couch with visible relief. We haven't had anything warm to drink since yesterday morning. As Johnny busied himself with the coffee maker, Lily had already claimed Aurora as a new friend, spreading her art supplies across the cleared table and encouraging the older girl to draw something. Aurora's eyes lit up as she examined the colored pencils and paper, basic supplies that Lily took for granted but represented luxury to someone who had been digging through garbage for educational materials. I used to love drawing, Aurora said quietly, picking up a blue pencil and testing its point against the paper. But I lost all my art supplies in the flood. You can use these any time, Lily declared with the generous spirit of childhood. Daddy says sharing makes everything better. While the girls drew together, Johnny and Elena found themselves in the kitchen area speaking in low tones over their coffee cups. Up close, Johnny could see the exhaustion in Elena's eyes, the kind of deep weariness that came from weeks of constant stress and uncertainty. How long have you been living like this? Johnny asked gently, not wanting to pry but needing to understand the scope of their situation. 18 days, Elena replied, with the precision of someone who had been counting each difficult night. Since the pipes burst and flooded our apartment on December 6th, the landlord claims the lease is void due to tenant negligence, though we did nothing wrong. We've been staying in the car most nights, sometimes at the women's shelter when there's space available. Johnny's construction background made him immediately suspicious of the landlord's claims. Burst pipes during winter freezes were almost always due to inadequate building maintenance, not tenant behavior. But he also knew that fighting such claims required lawyers and money that Elena clearly didn't have. What about Aurora's parents? Johnny asked carefully.
Elena's expression tightened with old pain. My daughter Carmen died in a car accident 3 years ago. Aurora's father had already left by then. He couldn't handle having a child with such exceptional academic needs. Said it was too much pressure, too much responsibility. She paused, sipping her coffee. Carmen was finishing her doctoral degree in biochemistry when Aurora was born. She passed her love of learning to her daughter. The family history explained much about Aurora's advanced capabilities and Elena's fierce determination to preserve the child's educational opportunities. This wasn't just about school supplies. It was about honoring a deceased mother's legacy and ensuring that Aurora's extraordinary potential wouldn't be wasted due to circumstances beyond their control. I was a mathematics professor at Universidad de Madrid before we immigrated to the United States 15 years ago, Elena continued, offering information that helped Johnny understand their current situation. But my Spanish credentials weren't recognized here, and by the time I could have completed the recertification process, Carmen needed help with Aurora. I took work as a translator and tutor instead. Johnny began to grasp the full tragedy of their circumstances. Elena wasn't just any grandmother struggling with homelessness. She was an educated professional whose career had been derailed by immigration bureaucracy and family responsibilities. Aurora wasn't just a bright child in need of school supplies. She was the inheritor of a family tradition of academic excellence that was now threatened by systemic failures and economic hardship. The translation work dried up when everything moved online and companies started using automated services. The tutoring was mostly cash-based, and when we lost the apartment, I lost contact with most of my students. Everything fell apart very quickly. As they talked, Johnny watched Aurora and Lily working together on their drawings. Aurora had sketched what appeared to be a complex geometric pattern, while Lily had drawn her interpretation of a Christmas tree. But what struck Johnny was the way Aurora explained mathematical concepts to Lily as they drew, talking about symmetry, proportion, and spatial relationships with the natural teaching ability that Elena had clearly passed down through the generations. "She's remarkable," Johnny said, nodding toward Aurora. "She could be anything she wants to be," Elena replied, her voice heavy with both pride and worry. "A scientist, an engineer,
a researcher who makes real discoveries. But none of that matters if she can't get the education she needs. Riverside Academy is her chance, maybe her only chance, to develop her abilities properly. The pressure of that realization settled over Johnny like a weight. Aurora's future, her potential contributions to the world, her ability to honor her mother's memory, her chances of breaking the cycle of poverty and displacement might depend on something as simple as acquiring the right textbooks and school supplies. It was simultaneously a small problem and an enormous one. "What exactly does she need for school?" Johnny asked, thinking practically about immediate solutions. Elena pulled out the crumpled supply list again, smoothing it carefully on the table. As she read through the items, Johnny felt his stomach sink. Advanced mathematics textbooks, scientific calculators, laboratory materials, specialized writing instruments, research guides, and various other educational tools added up to what would easily be several $100s, money that represented weeks of groceries for he and Lily's budget. "I've been calling every used bookstore, every educational supply company, every charity organization in 3 counties," Elena said. "Most of the textbooks Aurora needs are very specialized. Even used copies are expensive, and many are not available at all in secondary markets." Johnny found himself doing rapid mental calculations. His next paycheck wasn't due for another week, and it would barely cover their regular expenses. The small amount he'd saved for Lily's Christmas present wouldn't make a significant dent in Aurora's educational needs. But as he watched the 2 girls working together, Aurora's natural teaching ability complementing Lily's eager curiosity, Johnny began to understand that helping them might benefit his own daughter as much as theirs. The question wasn't whether Aurora deserved assistance. That was obvious. The question was how someone with Johnny's limited resources could make a meaningful difference in the face of such comprehensive need. As Christmas Eve deepened into night, with Aurora and Elena safe and warm for the first time in weeks, Johnny began forming the outline of a plan that would require every connection he'd made and favor he could call in from his years in the construction industry. Christmas morning arrived with unexpected warmth in Johnny's small apartment. Aurora and Elena had spent the night on the pull-out couch, the first real sleep either had experienced in nearly 3 weeks. Johnny woke to the sound of quiet conversation between the girls, who were already comparing their Christmas wishes over cups of hot chocolate he'd prepared before anyone else stirred. "Aurora, look what Santa brought," Lily whispered excitedly, holding up the modest art set that Johnny had managed to afford. "But I think Santa made a mistake. There are 2 of everything in here." Johnny smiled from the kitchen area, realizing that Lily had instinctively begun sharing her Christmas gifts with Aurora, treating her new friend as the sister she'd never had. Aurora's eyes filled with tears as she touched the colored pencils and sketch pads, simple supplies that represented luxury after weeks of having nothing. "I haven't had new art materials since before the flood," Aurora said softly. "My grandmother used to buy me supplies when she had tutoring work, but that was months ago." Elena emerged from the bathroom, having used Johnny's shower for the first time in weeks. Her silver hair was neatly arranged, and she wore the same clothes as yesterday, but clean and pressed. The hot water and soap had restored some of her natural dignity, and Johnny could see glimpses of the university professor she had once been. "Johnny," Elena said, approaching him with formal politeness, "Aurora and I have discussed our situation, and we cannot continue to impose on your hospitality. You've already done more than enough." But before Johnny could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Dave Morrison, Riverside Construction, and Johnny hesitated before answering. Dave was the company owner, and Christmas morning calls usually meant emergency repairs that couldn't wait for regular business hours. "Johnny, sorry to bother you on Christmas, but I've got a situation. The heating system at Riverside Academy just failed completely. Pipes are starting to freeze, and if we don't get emergency repairs done today, the whole building could suffer major damage.
I need my best crew supervisor to oversee the work. Johnny's mind raced. Emergency repairs meant overtime pay at holiday rates, potentially enough money to make a real difference for Aurora's school supplies. But it also meant leaving Elena and Aurora alone in his apartment on Christmas Day, hardly the kind of hospitality he wanted to provide. "I'll be there in an hour," Johnny said, then made a split-second decision. "Dave, I'm bringing some family members with me. I hope that's okay." After explaining the situation to Elena and Aurora, Johnny was surprised by their enthusiastic response. Elena's eyes lit up with professional interest when he mentioned the heating system failure, while Aurora immediately began asking technical questions about the building's infrastructure. "I might be able to help," Elena said, her voice carrying a confidence that Johnny hadn't heard before. "Before I focused on mathematics education, my undergraduate degree was in mechanical engineering. HVAC systems were actually my specialty." The revelation stopped Johnny cold. Elena wasn't just a mathematics professor. She was a trained engineer with exactly the expertise needed for this emergency repair. The irony was staggering. Here was a woman spending Christmas morning homeless and desperate who possessed the technical knowledge to solve a crisis at the very school her granddaughter desperately needed to attend. An hour later, Johnny's pickup truck pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Academy, its imposing brick buildings and manicured grounds a stark contrast to the modest neighborhoods where Johnny and Elena had been living. Aurora pressed her face against the truck window, taking in every detail of the campus that represented her educational future. Dave Morrison met them at the main entrance, a stocky man in his 50s whose usual holiday cheer was replaced by stress and urgency. "Johnny, thank God you're here. The heating contractor we called wants to charge triple rates for Christmas work, and I'm not even sure he can diagnose the problem correctly. Johnny, I'd like you to meet Elena Vasquez. She's a mechanical engineer with HVAC specialization. She might be able to help us figure out what's wrong." Dave's expression shifted from politeness to skepticism. Elena, despite Johnny's efforts to help her clean up, still showed signs of their recent hardships. Her clothes, while clean, were obviously worn, and she lacked the polished appearance that Dave expected from professional consultants. "No offense, ma'am, but this is a pretty complex system. We're talking about a $2 million building with integrated climate control throughout multiple structures." Elena's response was immediate and precise. "Judging by the building's age and architectural style, you're likely dealing with a zone-controlled forced air system with backup radiant heating in the basement levels. The failure pattern you describe suggests either a primary circulation pump malfunction or a control board failure in the main mechanical room. Both are relatively straightforward to diagnose and repair if you have the right equipment." Dave's skepticism evaporated as Elena continued her technical analysis, using terminology and knowledge that clearly demonstrated her expertise. Johnny watched in fascination as Elena transformed from a desperate grandmother into a confident engineering professional, her years of education and experience reasserting themselves despite months of economic hardship. "Let me take a look at your mechanical systems," Elena continued. "I'll need access to the main utility room and any building schematics you have available."
"I ran into some complications," Dave continued. "First, there's the issue of licensing. In this state, anyone providing engineering services needs current professional certification. Your Spanish credentials and experience don't automatically transfer, and the licensing process could take months or even years." Elena nodded slowly. "I understand. Professional licensing is important for public safety and liability protection." "But that's not the biggest problem," Dave said, his discomfort evident. "I made the mistake of mentioning your situation to some of my business associates, thinking they might have additional opportunities for someone with your skills." The pause that followed was heavy with implication. Johnny could sense where this conversation was heading, and his anger began building even before Dave continued. "Word got around about our Christmas emergency repair, and some people started asking questions about my hiring practices.
There are concerns about liability, insurance coverage, and what one of my competitors called the optics of hiring homeless people for professional positions. The phrase hit Johnny like a physical blow. Homeless people, as if Elena's current housing situation somehow negated decades of education and professional experience. As if sleeping in a car for 3 weeks erased her ability to diagnose complex mechanical problems that had stumped licensed contractors. "Mr. Morrison," Elena said with careful dignity, "I understand that my current circumstances might create complications for your business. I don't want to cause problems for you or Johnny." "It's not about your abilities," Dave said quickly. "What you did on Christmas was remarkable. But construction is a relationship business, and client confidence is everything. If word gets out that I'm hiring people off the street, even people with your qualifications, it could damage contracts worth millions of dollars." Johnny couldn't contain his frustration any longer. "Dave, Elena has more engineering expertise than half the consultants you've hired over the years. She solved a problem in 15 minutes that your regular contractor couldn't figure out at all." "I know that," Dave replied defensively. "But business isn't just about technical competence. It's about perception, reputation, and maintaining relationships with clients who have certain expectations about the professionals they work with." The ugly truth behind Dave's words was clear. Elena's homelessness had marked her as unacceptable in the professional world, regardless of her qualifications. The same economic circumstances that made her desperate for work also made her unemployable in the eyes of potential clients who equated housing status with professional competence. "There might be a way to work around this," Dave said, his tone suggesting he was trying to find a compromise. "If Elena could get reestablished, find stable housing, update her credentials, maybe work as a subcontractor rather than a direct employee, then we could revisit the employment possibility in 6 months or a year." The circular logic was maddening. Elena needed work to afford housing, but she couldn't get work without stable housing. She needed income to pursue professional licensing, but she couldn't get income without current licenses. The system was designed to exclude people in her exact situation, regardless of their abilities or potential contributions. Elena stood up with quiet dignity. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your honesty. I understand that business decisions sometimes conflict with personal preferences." After they left Dave's office, the drive back to Johnny's apartment was silent for several minutes. Elena stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods, her expression unreadable. Johnny gripped the steering wheel, furious at a system that could waste Elena's talents due to bureaucratic obstacles and social prejudices. "I should have expected this," Elena said finally. "Homelessness changes how people see you, even when nothing else about you has changed. I'm the same engineer I was 3 weeks ago, but now I'm also homeless, and that becomes the only thing that matters." Johnny pulled into the parking lot behind Chen's laundromat and turned off the engine. "This isn't over, Elena. There has to be another way." "Is there?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had fought too many battles against impossible odds. "I've been trying to find work for months, even before we lost the apartment. The translation services don't pay enough to cover rent, the tutoring work is inconsistent, and my engineering credentials aren't recognized here. Maybe I've been fooling myself about rebuilding our lives." The defeat in Elena's voice was heartbreaking, but what worried Johnny more was the impact on Aurora. When they climbed the stairs to his apartment, they found the 2 girls working on their science project, Aurora's natural teaching ability helping Lily understand concepts that would challenge children twice her age. "Grandmother Elena," Aurora called out happily, "Lily and I figured out how to make a lever system that can lift out of weight. Want to see?" Elena forced a smile as Aurora demonstrated their creation, but Johnny could see the pain behind her expression. Here was a child whose intellectual gifts could benefit the world, but whose future was threatened by adult failures and systemic barriers that had nothing to do with merit or potential. Later that evening, after the girls had gone to bed,
Johnny and Elena sat at his small kitchen table, sharing coffee and the weight of their situation. Elena had been quiet since returning from Dave's office, and Johnny could sense her internal struggle between hope and resignation. "Aurora asked me tonight if we were going to stay here forever," Elena said quietly. "She's trying to understand our situation. But how do you explain to a 10-year-old that the world doesn't always value intelligence and hard work the way it should? I've been wrestling with similar questions about my own circumstances. Maybe the problem isn't that the world doesn't value those things. Maybe the problem is that we're looking for validation from the wrong people."
Elena looked at him questioningly, and Johnny continued, his thoughts forming as he spoke. Dave Morrison and his business associates, they're part of a system that's designed to maintain certain hierarchies. But there are other systems, other ways to create value and find recognition. What do you mean? Johnny pulled out his phone and showed Elena a news article he'd been reading. "Look at this. It's about a nonprofit in Denver that helps homeless individuals start their own businesses. Instead of trying to fit into existing employment structures, they create new ones." Elena read the article with growing interest. The organization provided microloans, business mentoring, and professional development services specifically for people experiencing homelessness. Several success stories were featured, including a former software engineer who had started a computer repair service and a displaced teacher who had launched a tutoring cooperative. "The difference," Johnny continued, "is that they focus on what people can do rather than what they've lost. Your engineering skills, your teaching ability, Aurora's exceptional intelligence, those are assets, not problems to be solved." Elena set down her coffee cup, something shifting in her expression. "You're suggesting we stop trying to convince other people to hire me and start creating our own opportunities." "I'm suggesting that maybe we've been approaching this backwards. Instead of waiting for someone like Dave to offer you a job, what if we figured out how to put your skills to work directly? Consulting, tutoring, problem-solving for people who need help but can't afford the established professional services." The idea was taking shape as they discussed it. Elena's engineering expertise could serve small businesses, homeowners, and community organizations that couldn't afford major consulting firms. Her teaching abilities could help students who are struggling in traditional educational settings. Aurora's exceptional academic skills could complement her grandmother's tutoring services, creating a unique educational resource. "It would mean starting from nothing," Elena said, but her voice carried a different quality now. Not defeat, but consideration. "We're already starting from nothing," Johnny pointed out. "The question is whether we want to keep asking permission from people who don't understand our value, or whether we want to prove that value directly." Elena was quiet for several minutes, turning the coffee cup in her hands as she thought. Finally, she looked up at Johnny with something approaching determination. "What would we need to make something like this work?" Johnny smiled, recognizing the shift from despair to possibility. "We'd need to be smart, resourceful, and willing to work harder than we've ever worked before. But those are things we already know how to do." Outside, snow began falling again, but inside Johnny's small apartment, two people who had been knocked down by circumstances beyond their control began planning their way back up. The first week of January brought both opportunity and terror in equal measure. Johnny had spent 3 sleepless nights researching business licensing requirements, insurance options, and marketing strategies for what he and Elena were calling Riverside Solutions, a consulting service that would offer engineering expertise and educational support to underserved communities. Elena sat at Johnny's kitchen table, surrounded by printed articles about small business development, her notebook filled with calculations and business projections written in the precise handwriting of someone trained in technical documentation. Aurora and Lily were at school, giving the adults their first quiet planning session since New Year's Day. "The numbers are challenging, but not impossible," Elena said, tapping her pen against a spreadsheet she'd created by hand.
We need approximately $1,500 to cover basic business licensing, liability insurance, and initial marketing materials. That assumes we use your truck for transportation and this apartment as our initial office space." Johnny looked at the figure and felt his stomach tighten. $1,500 represented nearly 2 months of his typical income after expenses. But the alternative, continuing to watch Elena's talents go unused while Aurora's educational opportunities slipped away, felt far worse than financial risk. "I've been thinking about Mrs. Chen downstairs. She owns 6 laundromats across Riverside Heights, plus 2 dry cleaning shops. She mentioned last month that she's been having problems with one of her commercial washers overheating." Elena's eyes lit up with professional interest. Industrial laundry equipment uses complex water circulation and heating systems. If the overheating is caused by mechanical failure rather than electrical problems, it's exactly the kind of issue I could diagnose and solve. And Mrs. Chen trusts me. If I vouched for your expertise, she might be willing to pay for a consultation. It could be our first real client. The conversation was interrupted by Johnny's phone ringing. The caller ID showed Riverside Academy, and Johnny's heart rate accelerated as he imagined various catastrophes that might require Aurora's presence at school. "Mr. Red, this is Principal Margaret Foster from Riverside Academy. I'm calling about Aurora Vasquez." Johnny exchanged a worried glance with Elena before putting the phone on speaker. "Is Aurora okay?"
Aurora is fine, but I need to discuss her enrollment status with her legal guardian. Are you able to reach Elena Vasquez? "I'm here," Elena said, moving closer to the phone. "This is Elena Vasquez. Is there a problem with Aurora's scholarship?" "Ms. Vasquez, I'm afraid there's been a complication. Our winter semester begins next week, and we still haven't received Aurora's required educational materials. The scholarship covers tuition, but students are expected to have all necessary supplies by the first day of classes." Elena's face went pale. Despite their Christmas breakthrough in business planning, they still hadn't solved the fundamental problem of Aurora's school supplies. The textbooks and materials remained prohibitively expensive, and their business venture wouldn't generate income quickly enough to address the immediate deadline. "Principal Foster," Elena said carefully, "we've experienced some temporary housing difficulties that have delayed our ability to purchase Aurora's materials. Is there any flexibility in the deadline?" "I understand that families sometimes face unexpected challenges," Principal Foster replied, her tone sympathetic but firm. "However, our accelerated program moves very quickly, and students who fall behind in the first week often struggle to catch up. If Aurora doesn't have her materials by Monday, we may need to offer her spot to another student on our waiting list." The threat hung in the air like a sword over everything they'd been planning. Aurora's acceptance to Riverside Academy represented the culmination of years of academic achievement and her best chance for educational advancement. Losing that opportunity over something as basic as textbooks felt like a failure of everything Elena had sacrificed to give her granddaughter a better life. "How much time do we have?" Elena asked. "Classes begin Monday morning. If Aurora has her materials by then, we can proceed with her enrollment. If not, I'll need to make other arrangements." After Principal Foster hung up, Elena sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the business plans spread across the table. The irony was devastating. They were developing a consulting service that could eventually provide the income needed for Aurora's education, but they needed Aurora's education to be secure before the business could succeed. "We're going to make this work," Johnny said, suddenly, his voice carrying a determination that surprised even himself. "Elena, how much would Aurora's materials cost if we bought them new?" Elena consulted the supply list that had become a fixture on Johnny's kitchen table. "Approximately $450 for everything she needs immediately. We could phase in some of the optional materials over the first month,
but the core textbooks and scientific calculator are non-negotiable. Johnny made rapid mental calculations. His next paycheck wasn't due for another week, and it would barely cover their basic living expenses. But he'd been saving $20 here and there in a coffee can tucked behind the flower in his kitchen cabinet. Emergency money that he'd been accumulating for months without any specific purpose. "Wait here," Johnny said, disappearing into the kitchen area. He returned with the coffee can, dumping its contents onto the table. Crumpled bills and loose change scattered across Elena's business plans, the result of months of small sacrifices and careful budgeting. "Elena, no," Johnny said immediately. "That's your emergency fund. I can't let you spend your savings on Aurora's school supplies." "Elena, look at me," Johnny said firmly. "Aurora getting her education isn't just about her future. It's about all of our futures. If she succeeds at Riverside Academy, if she develops her talents properly, she could become the kind of person who solves problems for thousands of other families. This isn't charity, it's an investment." Elena's face filled with tears as she stared at the money scattered across the table. Johnny began counting the bills and coins, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had learned to stretch every dollar. $237, Johnny announced. "It's not enough for everything, but it's a start." "I have something too," Elena said quietly, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small jewelry box. Inside was a gold necklace with a pendant that caught the morning light. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me when I graduated from university, and I gave it to Carmen when she started her doctoral program. It's been in our family for 3 generations. Johnny understood immediately what Elena was suggesting and the sacrifice it represented. The necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was a tangible connection to family history, a symbol of educational achievement that had been passed down through generations of strong women. "Elena, you can't sell your mother's necklace. It's irreplaceable." "My mother would understand," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the tears. She believed that education was the most valuable inheritance a family could provide. If selling this necklace gives Aurora the tools she needs to succeed, then it's serving exactly the purpose my mother intended. The combination of Johnny's savings and the proceeds from Elena's necklace would provide enough money to purchase Aurora's immediate educational needs. But as Johnny looked at Elena's determined expression, he realized that this moment represented something far more significant than a financial transaction. "We're really doing this," Johnny said, half question, half statement. "We're really doing this," Elena confirmed. "Aurora gets her school supplies, we launch Riverside Solutions, and we prove that circumstances don't define what people can achieve."
Johnny stood up and extended his hand to Elena in a gesture that felt both formal and deeply personal. "Partners?" Elena shook his hand firmly. "Partners." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. Johnny and Elena drove to 3 different bookstores and educational supply companies, carefully purchasing each item on Aurora's list while staying within their combined budget. Elena's eye for quality and value ensured they got the best possible materials for their money, while Johnny's familiarity with local businesses helped them find discounts and deals that stretched their resources further. At Peterson's Pawn and Jewelry, Elena sold her mother's necklace to a sympathetic owner who understood the sacrifice involved. The transaction was handled with dignity and respect, though Johnny could see the pain in Elena's eyes as she watched the family heirloom disappear into the shop's inventory. "Temporary," Elena said quietly as they left the shop. "Once Riverside Solutions is successful, I'll buy it back." By evening, Aurora school supplies were neatly organized on Johnny's kitchen table. Textbooks covered in protective plastic, scientific calculators still in its packaging, and various materials arranged with a care of precious artifacts. When Aurora and Lily returned from their day at school, Aurora's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. "Grandmother Elena, you got everything. All my books and the calculator and even the advanced geometry set." Elena held her granddaughter close, drawing strength from Aurora's joy and excitement. "You start at Riverside Academy on Monday, mija." Are you ready? Aurora's smile could have powered the entire building. I've been ready my whole life. That night, as Johnny prepared for bed on his fold-out couch while Elena and Aurora shared the bedroom, he reflected on the magnitude of what they'd committed to. They'd spent nearly every dollar they had, sold a family heirloom, and staked their entire future on an untested business plan. By any conventional measure, their decision was reckless and financially irresponsible. But watching Aurora arrange her new textbooks with reverent care, seeing Elena's renewed sense of purpose and dignity, Johnny knew they'd made the right choice. Sometimes the biggest risks led to the most important rewards, and sometimes the only way forward was to commit completely to an uncertain future rather than accepting the certainty of continued failure. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes with new beginnings. Aurora stood in Johnny's small bathroom, carefully braiding her hair while wearing the uniform blazer that marked her as a Riverside Academy student. The transformation was remarkable. The desperate child who had been searching through garbage just 2 weeks earlier now carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in academic excellence. "Grandmother Elena, do I look like a real Academy student?" Aurora asked, adjusting her collar with nervous precision. Elena smiled, her own appearance reflecting the changes that had swept through their lives. She wore a professional blouse that Johnny had helped her select from the thrift store, and her silver hair was arranged in the neat style she'd favored during her university teaching days. "Mija, you don't look like a real Academy student. You are a real Academy student." While Aurora prepared for her first day at Riverside Academy, Johnny was already implementing the first phase of their business plan. At 7 a.m., he knocked on Mrs. Chen's apartment door, Elena beside him carrying a toolkit that combined his construction tools with engineering instruments she'd acquired from a retiring contractor. Mrs. Chen, a woman in her 70s whose business acumen had built a small empire from a single coin-operated laundromat, studied Elena with a sharp assessment of someone who had learned to judge character quickly and accurately. "You understand commercial laundry equipment?" Mrs. Chen asked directly. "I understand fluid dynamics, heat transfer, and mechanical systems. Commercial washers are simply applications of those principles on an industrial scale." The problematic washing machine was located in Mrs. Chen's busiest laundromat, a unit that had been running poorly for 3 weeks and costing her hundreds of dollars in lost revenue while multiple repair technicians failed to diagnose the issue correctly. Elena's examination was methodical and thorough. She checked water pressure, examined heating elements, tested electrical connections, and analyzed the machine's cycle patterns with a systematic approach of someone trained to solve complex problems. Johnny assisted by providing access to hard-to-reach components and translating Elena's technical observations into practical repair steps. The primary issue is inadequate water circulation caused by a partially blocked heat exchanger. The blockage is causing the heating system to work overtime, which creates the overheating you've been experiencing. Mrs. Chen's previous repair technicians had focused on the heating elements and electrical systems, missing the fundamental circulation problem that was causing the symptoms they'd attempted to treat. Elena's engineering background allowed her to see the machine as an integrated system rather than a collection of separate components. "Can you fix it?" Mrs. Chen asked. "With Johnny's help, yes. We'll need to flush the heat exchanger and replace some circulation filters, but the repair should restore full functionality." The work took 3 hours, during which Elena demonstrated not only her technical expertise, but also her ability to teach and explain complex concepts. Several of Mrs. Chen's regular customers gathered to watch the repair process, fascinated by Elena's clear explanations of how their laundry was actually being cleaned.
"You see," Elena said to one curious customer, "the washing machine is essentially a controlled chemical reaction chamber. Water temperature, detergent concentration, and mechanical agitation must all be precisely balanced to achieve optimal cleaning without damaging fabrics." When the repaired washing machine completed its first full cycle, running smoothly and maintaining proper temperature throughout, Mrs. Chen's satisfaction was immediate and obvious. "How much do I owe you?" she asked Elena. Elena quoted the consultation fee they'd established, $75, significantly less than the established repair companies had charged for unsuccessful diagnoses, but enough to cover their business expenses and provide modest profit. Mrs. Chen paid without hesitation, then surprised them both with an additional request. "I have 5 other laundromats and 2 dry cleaning shops. When can you examine the rest of my equipment?" The success with Mrs. Chen created immediate momentum for Riverside Solutions. Word spread quickly through the small business community of Riverside Heights that Elena and Johnny could solve mechanical problems that had stumped other technicians. Their combination of Elena's engineering knowledge and Johnny's practical repair skills proved uniquely effective for equipment issues that required both theoretical understanding and hands-on implementation. By Wednesday, they had completed consultations for a restaurant owner whose industrial dishwasher was malfunctioning, a small manufacturing company with heating system problems, and a community center where the pool filtration system had been operating inefficiently for months. Each successful repair built their reputation and provided income that began stabilizing their precarious financial situation. More importantly, the work restored Elena's sense of professional identity and purpose. After months of feeling invisible and worthless, she was once again solving complex problems and receiving recognition for her expertise. The transformation in her demeanor was remarkable. Shoulders straighter, voice more confident, eyes bright with the satisfaction that came from meaningful work. Aurora's experience at Riverside Academy was equally transformative. Her first week confirmed everything Elena had hoped about her granddaughter's exceptional abilities. Aurora's mathematics teacher reported that she was already working beyond grade level, while her science instructor noted her unusual ability to grasp complex concepts and explain them to struggling classmates. "Aurora has a natural teaching gift," Principal Foster told Elena during their Friday check-in call. "She's not only excelling academically, but helping other students understand difficult material. It's quite remarkable for someone her age." The observation sparked an idea that would further expand their business model. Elena began offering tutoring services to supplement their consulting work, focusing on students who were struggling with mathematics and science concepts. Aurora, despite being younger than most of her tutoring students, proved to be an exceptional assistant, able to explain complex ideas in ways that resonated with children who had been frustrated by traditional teaching methods. Their first tutoring client was Marcus Thompson, a 7th grader who was failing algebra despite obvious intelligence. His parents had tried multiple tutoring services without success before hearing about Elena's unique approach through Mrs. Chen's recommendation network. "Mathematics isn't about memorizing formulas," Elena explained to Marcus during their initial session. "It's about recognizing patterns and relationships that exist everywhere in the natural world." Aurora, working alongside her grandmother, demonstrated algebraic concepts using building blocks and everyday objects, making abstract equations tangible and understandable. Within 2 weeks, Marcus's grades had improved dramatically, and his parents were recommending Elena's tutoring services to other families facing similar challenges. The tutoring work created a parallel income stream that complemented their consulting business while allowing Aurora to develop her own teaching abilities. More importantly, it established Elena and Aurora as valuable resources within the Riverside Heights community, not just people who needed help, but people who could provide help to others. Johnny's role in their partnership extended beyond technical assistance. His construction industry connections provided access to potential clients, while his reputation for reliability and honesty gave credibility to their new business venture. He also handled the practical aspects of their operations, scheduling, transportation, and customer relations, allowing Elena to focus on the technical work where her expertise was most valuable. The financial impact was immediate and meaningful. Within 2 weeks, Riverside Solutions had generated enough income to cover their basic living expenses while building a modest reserve fund. More importantly, the steady work provided the stability that Alina needed to begin looking for permanent housing for herself and Aurora. On Friday evening, as they reviewed their first week's accomplishments, Johnny realized that their transformation extended beyond financial improvement. They had created something that none of them could have achieved individually, a partnership that leveraged each person's strengths while compensating for their limitations.
"We've helped 7 different families solve problems this week," Elena said, reviewing their client list. "Mrs. Chen's laundromats are running efficiently, Marcus is understanding algebra for the first time, and the community center's pool is finally maintaining proper chemical balance. And Aurora is thriving at Riverside Academy," Johnny added, watching through the window as Aurora and Lily worked together on a science project that combined Aurora's advanced knowledge with Lily's creative enthusiasm. Elena nodded, but her expression carried a thoughtfulness that suggested bigger ideas were forming. "Johnny, what if this is just the beginning? What if we could expand our services to help other families who are facing the same kinds of challenges we've overcome?" The question hung in the air between them, pregnant with possibilities that extended far beyond their current success. They had proven that circumstances didn't define capabilities, that hidden talents could be revealed and developed, and that unconventional partnerships could create value in ways that traditional employment structures couldn't match. Outside, snow began falling again, but inside Johnny's small apartment, 3 people who had been written off by various systems were planning how to help others avoid the same dismissal. Their transformation from desperate to valuable, from excluded to essential, was complete, but their impact on the world around them was just beginning. 6 weeks after Aurora's first day at Riverside Academy, Johnny opened his apartment door to find Principal Margaret Foster standing in the hallway, her professional demeanor slightly softened by genuine curiosity and something that looked remarkably like respect. "Mr. Red, I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit," Principal Foster said, glancing around the modest hallway above Chen's laundromat. "I was hoping to speak with you and Miss Vasquez about Aurora's progress and a proposal I'd like to discuss." Elena emerged from the kitchen area, where she'd been preparing materials for that afternoon's tutoring sessions. Her transformation over the past month had been remarkable. Gone was the desperate woman searching through garbage, replaced by someone who carried herself with the quiet authority of a respected professional. "Principal Foster," Elena said warmly, "is everything all right with Aurora?" "Everything is more than all right," Principal Foster replied, accepting their invitation to sit at the kitchen table that had become the unofficial headquarters of Riverside Solutions. "Aurora isn't just succeeding at Riverside Academy, she's revolutionizing how we think about peer-to-peer learning." Johnny poured coffee while Principal Foster explained Aurora's impact on her new school environment. In just 6 weeks, Aurora had not only mastered her own advanced curriculum, but had begun informally tutoring classmates who struggled with mathematics and science concepts. Her ability to explain complex ideas in accessible ways had caught the attention of multiple teachers. Last week, Aurora helped 3 students understand quadratic equations using a method involving paper airplanes and trajectory calculations. The approach was so effective that our mathematics department asked her to demonstrate the technique to other teachers. Elena's pride was evident, but Johnny could see her analytical mind working through the implications of Aurora's success. Their family's transformation had created opportunities not just for survival, but for genuine contribution to their community's educational resources. "There's something else," Principal Foster said, reaching into her briefcase. "The Riverside Academy Board has been discussing ways to expand our scholarship program to include more students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Aurora's success has demonstrated that exceptional talent exists everywhere, regardless of family circumstances." She spread several documents across the table: budget projections, program proposals, and demographic studies that painted a clear picture of educational inequality in their region. Johnny recognized the careful research and planning that had gone into the materials, the same systematic approach that Elena brought to engineering problems. "We want to establish a preparatory program for gifted students who show promise
but lack the academic foundation to succeed immediately in our regular curriculum, Principal Foster explained. The program would provide intensive tutoring, mentoring, and support services to help these students develop the skills they need for academic excellence. Elena leaned forward, her engineering background immediately grasping the structural challenges involved. You're talking about bridging the gap between potential and preparation, identifying students with Aurora's natural abilities, but providing the educational support they need to develop those abilities. Exactly, Principal Foster said, and we'd like you to design and oversee the program. The offer hung in the air like a turning point in their entire trajectory. Elena's expertise in both engineering and education, combined with Aurora's demonstrated teaching abilities, made them uniquely qualified to address the systemic problems that had nearly derailed Aurora's own educational journey. Johnny felt a surge of vindication watching Principal Foster treat Elena as the professional expert she had always been. 6 weeks ago, Elena was invisible to the educational establishment, a homeless woman whose circumstances overshadowed her capabilities. Now she was being asked to lead innovative programs that could transform other students' lives.
The position would be full-time, Principal Foster continued, with a salary commensurate with your expertise and the program's importance. More significantly, it would allow you to address the root causes of educational inequality rather than just treating the symptoms. Elena was quiet for several minutes, considering not just the professional opportunity, but its broader implications. Success in this role could establish her as a recognized expert in educational innovation, providing the platform to influence policy and practice on a larger scale. "I'm interested," Elena said finally, "but I have conditions." Johnny smiled at Elena's confident negotiation stance, remembering the desperate woman who had been afraid to accept charity just weeks earlier. "First," Elena continued, "the program must serve students regardless of their family's housing status or immigration documentation. Educational potential shouldn't be limited by bureaucratic obstacles." Principal Foster nodded. "Agreed. The board specifically wants to reach students who have been overlooked by traditional identification methods. Second, Aurora must be allowed to participate in program design and implementation. Her insights as someone who has navigated these challenges are invaluable, and her peer teaching abilities are exceptional." Also agreed. "We've never had a student contribute to curriculum development, but Aurora's results speak for themselves." Elena paused, then continued with a condition that surprised Johnny. "Third, Johnny Red must be included as a consulting partner for the program. His understanding of working-class family dynamics and practical problem-solving approaches are essential for reaching students from backgrounds similar to Aurora's." Johnny stared at Elena, overwhelmed by her inclusion of him in such a significant opportunity. His construction background and financial struggles hardly seemed relevant to academic program development, but Elena clearly saw connections that others missed. "Mr. Red's involvement would be valuable," Principal Foster agreed. "Many of our target students come from families where parents work in trades or service industries. Having someone who understands those environments could help us design more effective outreach and support strategies." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering program structure, funding mechanisms, and implementation timelines. Johnny found himself contributing insights about family economics, work schedules, and the practical barriers that prevented working-class families from engaging with traditional school programs. Elena's engineering approach to educational design was evident in every aspect of their planning. She thought systematically about student assessment, resource allocation, and outcome measurement, applying the same analytical skills that had made her successful in mechanical problem-solving. "We could start with a pilot program serving 15 students, small enough to manage carefully, large enough to generate meaningful data about what works and what doesn't." As Principal Foster prepared to leave, she turned back with one final observation.
Elena, I have to say that your family's story has changed how our entire staff thinks about student potential. Aurora's success, despite her circumstances, has forced us to question our assumptions about academic preparation and family support. After Principal Foster left, Johnny and Elena sat in their kitchen, surrounded by program proposals and possibility. The trajectory from Christmas Eve desperation to educational leadership felt almost surreal, yet each step had followed logically from the previous one. You didn't have to include me in the program. This is your expertise, your opportunity. Elena looked at him seriously. Johnny, everything we've accomplished has been through partnership. Your practical knowledge, your community connections, your understanding of how real families live, those aren't limitations. They're essential strengths. That evening, Aurora returned from school bubbling with excitement about a mathematics competition she'd entered and a science project she was developing with her study group. Her confidence and enthusiasm were infectious, transforming their small apartment into a space filled with intellectual energy and possibility. Grandmother Elena, my friend Marcus asked if you could help his little sister with her reading. She's having trouble in second grade, and her parents can't afford expensive tutoring. Johnny watched Elena consider the request, seeing her mental calculation of time, resources, and impact. Their consulting business was thriving, Elena's new position at Riverside Academy would provide financial security, and their tutoring services had established them as valuable community resources. Of course, Elena said, education shouldn't be a luxury that only some families can afford. The decision to help Marcus's sister led to additional requests from other families, creating an informal network of educational support that extended far beyond their original business model. Johnny found himself coordinating schedules, arranging transportation, and connecting families with resources that addressed not just academic needs, but practical barriers to student success.
Mrs. Chen's proposal was both practical and ambitious. She wanted to establish a permanent community education center in one of her properties, providing year-round space for tutoring, consultation services, and educational programming. The center would formalize the work that had been growing organically from Johnny's apartment, creating a sustainable structure for their expanding impact. Elena's program at the academy proves that intensive support can help any bright student succeed, Mrs. Chen explained. But we need something for families who can't access those formal programs, a place where neighborhood expertise can serve neighborhood needs. The conversation was interrupted by Principal Foster's arrival, her presence drawing attention from parents who recognized her as representing educational authority and opportunity. Over the past year, she'd become a genuine ally in their efforts to expand access to quality education. Elena, Principal Foster said, approaching with a document folder that Johnny recognized as containing official papers. The State Education Department has approved our grant proposal. The preparatory program is being funded for 5 years, with expansion to 3 additional districts. The grant approval meant that Elena's innovative approach to identifying and developing exceptional students from disadvantaged backgrounds would be replicated across their region. The model they developed through necessity and determination was now being recognized as a solution to systemic educational inequality. Aurora looked up from her science demonstration, her face bright with understanding of what the announcement meant for other students like herself. Grandmother Elena, that means hundreds of kids will get the same chances I got? Exactly, mija, Elena replied, pulling Aurora close. That's what happens when one success creates pathways for others to follow. As the education fair continued around them, Johnny reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 12 months ago, he'd been a struggling single father whose greatest ambition was making rent and providing basic stability for Lily. Now, he was part of an educational initiative that was changing how their entire region approached student development and family support. The afternoon concluded with a presentation by Student Success Stories.
Aurora, Marcus, and 6 other children whose academic trajectories had been transformed through the programs that grew from that Christmas Eve encounter. Each child spoke about their dreams and goals, their voices carrying the confidence that came from knowing that adult support systems existed to help them achieve their potential. This time last year, Aurora said during her presentation, my grandmother and I were looking for school books in garbage cans. Today, I'm helping other students understand that their circumstances don't define their possibilities. The assembled families responded with applause that felt like recognition of something larger than individual success, acknowledgement that communities could create the support systems that institutions sometimes failed to provide. As families began departing with information packets and contact details for various programs, Elena and Johnny found themselves alone in the alley for a few minutes, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd built together. "Did you ever imagine it would become this?" Johnny asked, gesturing toward the banners and empty tables that represented a day of connecting families with educational opportunities. Elena was quiet for a moment, looking around the space where desperation had been transformed into hope. "I imagined, Aurora, that'd succeed. I imagined we'd find stability, but I never imagined that our crisis could become other families' solution." The success of their partnership had exceeded every expectation, but more importantly, it had created a model for how individual resilience could generate community transformation. Their story had become proof that circumstances could be overcome, that hidden talents could be developed, and that the support system society failed to provide could be built by the people who needed them most. As they walked home together, Elena and Aurora now living in a 2-bedroom apartment that Elena's salary made possible, Johnny realized that their Christmas Eve encounter had given all of them something more valuable than financial stability or professional recognition. It had given them purpose, community, and the knowledge that individual actions could create lasting change. The alley behind Romano's Italian Bistro was empty now, except for scattered papers and the lingering sense of possibility that had been generated throughout the day. But in apartments and houses throughout Riverside Heights, families were discussing new opportunities and planning for futures that seemed impossible just hours earlier. Some transformations, Johnny understood, began with a single moment of choosing to help rather than walk away. But the most meaningful transformations continued expanding, creating waves of positive change that reached far beyond the original decision to care about a stranger's needs on a cold December night. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.